E kore au e naro, he kakano I ruia mai I Rangiatia. I shall not be lost, the seed that was sown from Rangiatia. Koutou rā, ko whakaraueka mai, kei raro I te maru o te wharenei, tēnā koutou katoa. To all of you, assembled in the shelter of this theatre, greetings to you all. Ngā mihi o te ahiahi. Good afternoon. And welcome to this session of the New Zealand Festival Writers' Week. Robert Dessaix, What Days Are For? I'm Paul Diamond. Before we begin, the usual warning, please ensure your phones are switched off or onto silent mode. And on behalf of the New Zealand Festival, I'd like to thank the Lion Foundation, Victoria University of Wellington, Creative New Zealand, QT Museum Wellington, and Unity Books. To read Robert Dessaix's writing is to spend time in the company of a master conversationalist with fine powers of observation. Travel, in its myriad forms, is a particular passion of this writer. In Night Letters, Robert's 1996 novel, this passion took us to Venice and elsewhere in Italy. Arabesques, A Tale of Double Lives in 2008, traced the travel routes of the French writer André Gide in Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Portugal, France, and Italy. Sometimes, as with Arabesques, Robert's writing journeys back in time, as in A Mother's Disgrace, which came out in 1994. Robert's biography about, amongst other things, how he met his birth mother and her story, and also about Robert's time living here in Wellington in the 1970s. His most recent book, What Days Are For, is ostensibly located in a ward in a Sydney hospital, covering the time Robert spent recovering from a heart attack which nearly killed him. There's also journeying in this book to India, Syria, and elsewhere. But whether it's Surrey Hills or Damascus or Udaipur, Robert's writing is always transporting and engaging. The title of the new book comes from a poem by Philip Larkin, which begins like this. What are days for? Days are where we live. They come, they wake us time and time over. They are to be happy in. Where can we live but days? So we're really fortunate to be spending part of this day with Robert Dessaix. So please join me in welcoming Robert Dessaix back to Wellington.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think we've agreed we'll go straight into a wee reading to set the scene for What Days Are For, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion, and there will be time for questions at the end of the session. Over to you.
Oh, thank you, Paul. You make me sound so interesting. Just for a couple of minutes, I'll read you the very opening bit. I'm sorry I can't look at everybody at once. You're such a long way away over there. But I know that you're there. Sunday night, his face beams down at me like God. From a dome of bright light, everything gleams. Every blonde hair on his tanned forearm glistens as he fits my mask. It's a glossy, muscled forearm, used to hefting bodies. I've always been very taken with forearms, and this is a singularly lustrous, sinewy example. So tell me, Robert, he says gently, somewhere high up there, inside his dome of dazzling light, am I already dead? No, not yet. Soon. Have you had a good day? A good day? I give a muffled laugh, batting away the pain blossoming in my chest. Apart from that, Mrs. Lincoln, did you enjoy the play? Tom Lehrer, wasn't it? They're losing me, these two paramedics in their fluorescent jackets, and they know it. Even I know that I'm teetering on the edge of a big moment, and all the one with a burnished forearm can come up with is, have you had a good day? It's surreal. The doors of the hotel foyer hiss open, and a man, a woman, and two teenage children burst in out of the cold, squawking with late-night excitement, catch sight of the trolley, the body, and the yellow jackets, and hurry off towards the lifts. You know, I croak as if it were a serious question, as if he really wanted to know. I have. I've had a very good day. And I have. I walked the dog by the river, I remember. I've reread my play script aloud to myself in the sun, flown off with it at dusk across the sea to Sydney, mooched about, I'd have liked to frisk, in the gritty trashiness of Oxford Street, still rumbling and screeching out there beyond the plate glass windows, and oh, other things as well. I've enjoyed lots of other things. Now I cast my mind back Would he want to know the details? Well, that's wonderful, he says. Still gleaming. That's what matters. Really? This sounds unlikely. But before I can pick an argument with him, they're trundling me out into the night. I'm spasming with cold. A siren is screaming. I glide through doors. There's a lot of shouting. I slew left. I slew right. There are dozens of jarring voices. I feel clawed at by all the voices. But for some reason, and I know it's strange, even as it's happening, they are all noises off. My mind is focused on the gleaming forearm and the voice from up inside the dome of light. Have you had a good day?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So that sets the scene for this very intriguing book. So what you're writing about happened in July 2011. I was very intrigued when I looked on the Wellington City Library catalogue. It's one of its catalogue headings is Heart, Diseases, Patients, Anecdotes. And I didn't even know there was a catalogue heading for that, but your book's in it. Why did you decide to write about what had happened to you in this form? How did the book come about?
Well, you see, I'm not writing about being ill. I never write about being ill. I'm not writing about hospitals. Nobody is interested in my being ill. What people are interested in is how you can live well given that you must die. And when you've just died, twice in my case, on that evening, once in the ambulance, once they got me to St. Vincent's, it all becomes very close to you. And I thought, I'll just record in some fashion. It's a work of art. I wasn't sitting with a diary and a pen, of course I wasn't. How I started to think about living well, or as I would prefer to say, living beautifully, given that I'm here for a short time. That's what the book's about. Of course, it's about hearts. The library's right, but it's not about that heart. It's about hearts in the sense of the place inside every single one of us, everyone in the theatre today, where feelings and ideas come together. That's what heart is for me. Not just feelings and not just affections, but it's where feelings and ideas dovetail. That's my heart, and that's your heart, and that's the heart that everybody has. And that's what I wanted to write about, really.
I understand what you're saying, but it also evokes a really strong sense of where you happen to be, which all of your work does, actually, where you're sort of journeying backwards in time and across in other countries beyond Australia. And it's really interesting how you create this incredibly vivid, multi-layered sense, and it works. It's the amazing thing is that it does work, and that you don't get muddled up between the sounds and smells and what's going on in the hospital and where you're taking the reader to. And I was fascinated at how could you remember the smells and the sounds and exactly what the man across from you in the ward was saying occasionally. But as you say, it's a creative work of art. You couldn't, you wouldn't have been as unwell as you were if you'd been able to have a wee notebook or a tape recorder.
Well, you see, nothing much else is going on inside me. I lead an incredibly banal life, I have to tell you. Pardon me. In reality, I put drops in the dog's eyes. I scrape last night's dinner off the bottom of the saucepan. I hoover. Actually, I don't hoover anymore. If you were there last night, you will have heard me speak about household appliances from David Jones. In fact, not long ago, I thought, to hell with it. I'll go to Bunnings and pig out. And I bought myself a little robot that we call J. Edgar, for obvious reasons. So I don't have to spend quite as much time hoovering as I used to. He does it all by himself. He squeaks if he gets caught under the couch. But I digress. Outwardly, my life is very banal, so I don't have a lot to remember. But inside, there is tumult. There is tumult here, and there is tumult here. And I have to put it down. I have to give it to you to see what you might make of it.
How does it look to you, this far along the line of having written it and having gone out into the world, and this being a chance for people to absorb it and for you to reflect on it, that whole process of trying to capture a sense of that experience?
I think differently about certain things probably from the way I thought, lying there in that bed with all those cannulae, don't you like a Latin plural, coming out of my arms. Of course, I mean, every month, let alone every year, I start to think slightly differently from the way I used to think, let alone the way I thought when I was 18 or 28 or 38 or 48. I haven't sat down and read the whole thing through, to be quite honest. I suppose I feel that this book is one of my most honest books. Now, you've read quite a few of my books. Do you think this is one of my more honest books?
Well, what I was going to ask you about was, you've said, when I write, and I write a lot of memoir, but even when I call a book a novel, as I did in the case of Night Letters or as I did in the case of Corfu, I'm actually writing about life as I remember it, as I saw it, as I heard it and felt it. And it's getting, coming back to that point you made, that actually people aren't interested specifically in your life. We're interested in our own lives as readers, and that's what we read you for. But it's still, yeah, I think it may well be. But it kind of is a companion piece, I think, to A Mother's Disgrace.
Yes, that's been said. Mother's Disgrace was my first book, which I wrote after I met my birth mother, and I thought it would be my last book. I hadn't intended to be a writer. I'd never had any dream to be a writer. And then I thought, well, actually, I will write one more. And then I wrote a third one, a fourth one, and so it went. But this is, in a sense, you're right, a companion to the first book, isn't it? Because that first book was also very honest in looking at this very small person, which is what I am, and trying to present who I am to someone who isn't immediately necessarily interested. The first book, I felt that my birth mother would want to know. It was partly a letter to her, but this isn't a letter to anyone. It's not a farewell, but it does sum up to some extent what I think about what is important in living a beautiful life.
And I think that comes through in a lot of your work. I mean, just to backtrack a wee bit to A Mother's Disgrace, as I said in the introduction, there's some really lovely material in that about Wellington, Oriental Bay, not far from where we are at the moment. That was quite a while ago, though, wasn't it, that you actually were here? You said you lived here for about a year and a half, did you?
Yes. I was married in those days, in the old-fashioned sense of the word married. You've always got to stipulate now, don't you, exactly what sense you were married. I was married in the old-fashioned sense. And I was desperately unhappy in Wellington. I can barely remember being as unhappy as I was in Wellington. But I didn't hold it against you. I've never held it against you. I've always had the warmest, almost euphoric feelings about Wellington because, now I don't believe in feng shui. Absolutely don't believe in feng shui, any of that sort of stuff at all. But there is something about the way Wellington is arranged which goes very deep inside to me and satisfies me at a very deep level. It's the mountains, the water, the being at the southern end of an island. This goes back to a very deep fantasy. Well, it goes back to Enid Blyton, actually, is where it goes back to, and Kirin Island. as you will hear if you come to Lower Hutt tomorrow evening.
One of the last places you ever went to church regularly.
Wellington, yes. One of the last places I did all sorts of things, actually, now I come to think of it looking back. But Wellington has just sort of crystallized there in my mind as the place where I was in a location that was a kind of fantasy location to me, and at the same time was utterly unhappy because I was abandoned here. And when you're an adopted child, as I was, you have a sort of phobia about abandonment. It is very difficult to get over that phobia of being dropped and not wanted anymore. Not having family, you say, not really. You don't know who you might turn to. And I was dropped in Wellington.
But even with that happening, there's still a strong sense of being engaged. And there's a lovely quote that you've referred to a few times from, is it André Gide, about realizing why he was bored in Rome is that he didn't find himself interesting in Rome.
That's right. I do not find myself interesting in Rome. I don't either, actually. I don't quite know why. I don't actually find myself interesting in New York. Isn't that weird? But I do in Hobart, and I do in Wellington. And I think that is the key.
But for the record, you did tell the Mercury a couple of years ago you don't find yourself interesting in Auckland.
What can I say? I feel the same about Launceston. I just don't. But here I do. And I think that it's always very important when you arrive somewhere and you can feel yourself beginning to find yourself interesting, to ask yourself what it is that makes you find yourself interesting, what has been brought alive, what has been animated in you by this place, by the people that you're meeting. And it won't usually be the usual things. I mean, it won't be the pyramids in Cairo, it won't be the Eiffel Tower in Paris, it won't be the Louvre. It will be something very specific to you. It will be the match. And you know, if I've learned anything in my life, it's that the important thing to keep an eye out for, a very sharp eye out, is the match. As you grow older, I think you more successfully match what you think and what you believe and what you love with what is. When you're young, that's hard to do. As you get older, it becomes easier, and the two start to dovetail, and that is so satisfying. It's the match.
What role does conversation play in that? Because I wanted to ask you about that. That's a theme that keeps coming up about, and it connects with intimacy, which I think is something else we might talk about. Because it seems like when you travel, what you seem to relish is the conversation from the meetings, which I guess helps you figure out that match.
It's partly why I like India, I think, because I can speak English, obviously, in India. Why I don't feel so attracted to China or Japan. I find it harder to have the sorts of conversations that I like. I mean, you've had a conversation with me, haven't you? Did you enjoy it? What was it about it?
Well, how about I just quote back at you? Deep down, I'm just a gossip. I mean, you actually mentioned that to me, but I think it's in one of your essays in the As I Was Saying collection. Well, the language, which makes you very nerve-wracking to email, because you know that the word's going to be, well, every writer's like this, but you always worry about my subjunctive voice, maybe.
I do pay attention to words. I mean, it is all I've got, in a sense. Words. I mean, nothing much else is causing that tumult that I was speaking about, except words. Well, conversation is a dying art, it seems to me. And I think the more connected we are, the less adept we are at conversation, paradoxically. It's one of the great joys of my life. And it's one of the great joys, I think, of living in a small town. You might not all agree with me there. Hobart is a very small town, much smaller than Wellington. And their conversation is very important. It's something that must just take off. You must give freedom to the person you're having a conversation with to say what he or she will, and you must go with it. It's a bit like a brush fire, I think I say somewhere, in that regard. You must just let it light up and die down and light up and die down and go where it would like to go. And it's hard to have nowadays. And I think you usually don't have it with the great love of your life, the man or the woman with whom you spend day after day and year after year, because with that one, many things stay unspoken. They are felt, they are known. There is a kind of a layer, I think, of people that you have good conversations with. You only need maybe 4, 5, 6 people that you have a vivifying conversation with once a day, once every 2 days. But I couldn't live without it. It's my great joy, and I think it's a skill that is slowly, slowly being lost. I think women are the masters of conversation, which is one of the wonderful things about being a gay man, of course, that you can grow close to women without there being any nervous glances. You can grow very close and you can have wonderful conversations. You know what I mean, don't you?
Mm.
But men are less likely, I think, to just allow themselves to drift where you would like to take them in a conversation.
And I want to ask you about technology, because if you read your work and think about the chronology of it, it's kind of interesting how technology has changed.
Yes.
Personal ads are important in your writing. There's a piece, a reference, I think it's in A Mother's Disgrace, where you're saying that at that time that you're writing about, one of the most important bits of equipment in the lives of the lesbians you knew was the answering machine, which is kind of really quaint now, because they had such busy lives and they were out running things and doing things that if they didn't have an answer.
Did I say that?
Yes,
I can't
you
believe
did.
it. Did I really?
But you see, things have changed, things have moved on. So I was really intrigued to see the reference, and as I was saying, to this information explosion that we're living in. And you're saying, promising to connect us in clusters of friends in animated conversation with each other across the globe, the technology has turned us into a vast flock of narcissists, squawking into the ether about the trivia of our lives like flocks of bored seagulls scavenging for chips. Through overuse, the very word friend now sounds trite. So, is it a lost cause, the sort of conversation that you find
I don't
you need?
know if it's a lost cause or not. I think probably for the next 20 years it's a bit of a lost cause, yes.
Mm.
You have to sit with someone, really. I know you can do it on Skype, but even that sort of gets in the way for me. I like to look at the texture of your skin when I talk to you. I like to look at your eyes. I like to look at your hair. I like to look at what you're wearing. I like to smell you, actually. I like to be there with you when I converse.
Well, that's why travel's important to you, which I thought was a lovely description of it as eating and waiting and feeling anxious, which I can relate to travel experiences like that. To disabuse people about some of the ideas of glamour, the glamour associated, well, yeah, some of your stories are pretty horrendous, and I don't know that I'd want to travel with you completely with some of the disasters you've talked about. There's one in this that's quite
You haven't been invited, of course, at this stage.
Let's talk about Angkor Wat. You spoke to Kim Hill late last year, and you said that in between that and coming here, you were going to be going to Cambodia, to Angkor Wat.
I did pop over. I only went for a week. I was a little disappointed. Are you supposed to say that? Because although it's the largest religious structure in the world, it felt dead to me. It's a Hindu temple, and I feel the Buddhists have taken over.
Sad.
I'm not a Hindu and I'm not a Buddhist, but it's just a tourist destination. It's a museum now. I much preferred the smaller Hindu temples I went to in India, for example, where they're alive, where there are people making sacrifices, there are people singing, there are people banging musical instruments, there are people worshipping. These are living places. I will even go into Christian churches if I feel they are alive. Not oddly enough in Australia, I would be embarrassed to go into a church in Australia. Isn't that weird? But I would go into one in France, just to experience the building and the people and the history and the sense of layered lives. At home, I would feel that my visit might be misunderstood, so I wouldn't do it.
Did you go to, I mean, there's lots and lots of temples in Siem Reap.
I
Did you
went
go
to
to
many.
others? Do you get the same feeling from all of them?
I was disappointed, that's all I could say. I reread my diary. I keep a diary when I travel. I don't normally keep a diary. Some of you probably keep a daily diary. I don't, but when I travel I do. And in my diary I wrote, I love it here. I love this. I loved even Phnom Penh, actually. But I did not fall in love.
So did that mean when you came to write this that you were starting from scratch? You didn't have a journal that you'd recorded?
No.
Goodness. So
But you're just lying there. And so,
you must have a good memory.
well, Alzheimer's hasn't kicked in quite yet.
As well as technological change, another thing that occurs to me reading your work is that makes it quite poignant is political change. And you talk a lot about Syria.
I went to Syria for a whole month just before everything turned bad.
Would you say we all spring from, is it Palmyra? How do you say that?
I say Palmyra, but I suppose
Palmyra.
you can say Palmyra, I don't know.
And like no one can go to Syria at the moment. But there's quite a lot about Syria and other places that are very difficult to travel to.
Yeah.
Just was curious about your thoughts about that the narrowing of opportunity to be in these other places, to find that match.
Well, I stick, as you know, to the Silk Road because that's where I seem to come alive. And Syria is at the very nub of the Silk Road. This is where tracks from China and also from India and also from the Indian Ocean came up through the Persian Gulf and down through Iran. And they came through Palmyra, actually, and then spread out again and went to Alexandria and went to Turkey and went to Europe. And so goods from China or places along the road might end up in Scotland. And it's this that fascinates me. I have a fascination for connections. Whether this goes back to being adopted and feeling that I was born without connections, I'm not sure. I suspect it might a little bit. I'm excited by that kind of thing. So I only go to places on the Silk Road. I don't find South America very interesting. It's not that I'm saying it isn't interesting. Of course it is. I mean, I have friends who are passionate about Cuba, passionate about Brazil, passionate about Colombia. It's that I don't feel much there. I'm not very interested in Africa, apart from the north bit.
But you are interested in India.
But I'm interested in
Feeling
India.
200% alive. Why?
Well, it's partly the conversations. It's partly the eros. I do travel for eros. Am I allowed to say that? How much more should I say? I think that a lot of us do travel for eros. Eros isn't the same thing as sex. It's the sense of being sensually present in someone's eyes and of their being sensually present in yours and of giving pleasure and of receiving it and of it happening now. And I only get that in certain places, never in Hobart. We don't do eros in Hobart. Everyone has already been married to everybody in Hobart. But in India, it's on every street corner. It's a miracle. I mean, especially for an older man. I am old. For an older man to feel that is a miracle. Truly it is. I could walk from one end of Paris to the other. No one would even see I was there. They would walk into me. They do walk into me. They push me over. They elbow me aside. I do not exist.
You told me there are
in Paris.
bars that have signs saying age limits. I'd never heard of that.
No one over 35 allowed in. entrée interdite. But in India, there seems to be a different view, and in many other countries also, actually. And I want to say again, it's about eros, I think, deep down, at my age, basically.
And you're not done with India, are you? There's still
I'd
parts
like
of
to
it
go
that you-
back another time. I don't look forward a long way. Many of you here today will know what I mean when I say I don't look forward a long way. I am looking forward to about next September and thinking that would be a nice thing to do, to go maybe to Tamil Nadu in September. What I do next year, I don't know. Will I be alive next year? I don't know. But maybe in September. You see, the thing is, travel is a great time for me to crystallize all sorts of things inside me that stay fluid when I'm at home. They don't come to rest and crystallize. And when I travel, I look back and everything sort of comes together in a strong, transparent, shiny, jagged little ball. And that's one of the reasons I travel. I travel for many reasons, but that's one of them. And it happens to me in India. There are other places I would like to go. I would quite like to go to Iran. But of course, they hang homosexuals in Iran. So you have to kind of watch yourself a little bit.
Well, another place that's not too friendly to homosexuals at the moment is Russia, which a place you spend a lot of time
I've fallen out of love with Russia. And of course, it was my great passion. It was my passion for decades. I still speak it, I still read it. But the love has gone because of what's happened there.
But what happens there will have a lot of bearing on other parts of the world. Do you have any thoughts about where things might be headed there?
No, my thoughts are of no consequence.
Well, that's good.
I'm not a political thinker. They have no consequence. And as I say, I don't look forward very far. I mean, how am I to know? If Donald Trump wins the election in America and Vladimir Putin stays in power in Russia, anything could happen. I mean, the world could blow up.
Do you believe in cycles? Because it seems like this creation of the super rich seems like another version of that oligarchy. Is that the right word? In the Chekhov novels, that huge fortunes that were amassed by this. I mean, it's not based on aristocracy, but it seems like another form of servitude in one part of the population and massive wealth on the other.
Nothing's changed, you see. But nobody wants things to change. They have to want things to change.
You said you wanted, well, you've already talked a wee bit about this, crushes and infatuation.
Did I say I wanted to talk about crushes?
Shall we, I love that bit you've thought about reading. Shall we do that?
You thought about my reading it. I didn't think about reading it. Would you
not-
like me to read this
It's
about
not
crushes?
that long and it's really lovely.
My book is more than it should be about crushes and infatuation. It's more about those things than about love.
And those Indian doctors with their ties.
I love a silk tie. They're Bangladeshi, actually.
That's right.
There's a difference. You just have to say Bangladeshi and I'm a quiver. What a wonderful thing a crush is. While it's love that tends to hog the limelight, and not just great loves either, which are these days called LTRs, long-term relationships, for those of you of a certain age. But any kind of wild romance or Madame Bovary experience, infatuations, crushes, and fleeting obsessions are usually much more memorable. Indeed, many of us can recall a brief amour when we were 16 with much greater clarity and lingering pain than a marriage lasting decades. Yes, all right, I speak from experience. Crushes flourish in summer. Mere lust might raise its head in spring, but the crush, an infinitely more nuanced sort of longing, barely carnal, blooms best, most agonizingly and lushly in the heat. And at the height of summer, at least when I was a teenager, it was rampant at the beach. Living as I did a long bus and tram ride from the nearest beach, I mostly moped about like the heroine of a Jane Austen novel, bored, frustrated, waiting for something to happen. Above all, to be picked up and taken to the beach. but really for anything to happen, to fill the emptiness. I can remember spending whole weeks yearning to be at the beach, where I knew the object of that month's desire would be sprawled in the sun, oiled and salty, lithe but relaxed, alongside other oiled, salty, lithe but relaxed young things. I would long to be there with them all, ache to touch and be touched, to feel that bolt of whatever it was called shoot through me, whatever it was that shot through people in books and films, through Marianne Dashwood, for example, in Sense and Sensibility, when she first clapped eyes on that sultry cad, Mr. Willoughby. I haven't practiced this, so I might make some mistakes. She called it love, and at that stage in my innocence, I was inclined to believe her. When I was a student of 19, apropos of nothing I could put my finger on, a grin perhaps, a laugh, a way of being all the things I'd like to be, but never would be, I suddenly came down with a particularly bad case of infatuation, totally unrequited, naturally. If it's requited, it's called something else. By the summer, with 3 months of vacation time yawning before me, I was teetering on the verge of insanity. Not only would I be marooned in the muggy hinterland of Sydney for the duration, but the dastardly Mr. Willoughby, to my chaste Marianne Dashwood, as it were, was setting sail on a tramp to visit some of the more Mormish ports of Southeast Asia, places like Malacca and Kuching, and quite possibly somewhere steamy in Sumatra. I no longer remember exactly. Places that made Lane Cove feel like the most boring backwater on the face of the planet. And to raise the temperature and make things worse, the airwaves were full of Beatles songs that summer. Everyone, except me, seemed to be twisting and shouting and wanting to hold someone or other's hands. There's not much more to go, just be patient. Now, there's only one real cure for the listlessness, jealousy, and chagrin of the kind affecting Marianne Dashwood: marriage. In the meantime, however, while waiting for suitable suitors to appear, she indulged in self-improvement, or at least she and her sister went on walks in the rain and played the piano and quite possibly read poetry and embroidered. I decided to follow their example. I would teach myself to type. Week after week, I sat and typed, while my Willoughby cavorted with dusky natives in the soft, spice-laden air of, well, I didn't want to picture it too specifically. It was too painful. I sat at my desk in Lane Cove and typed, to the sounds of Can't Buy Me Love and All My Loving on my transistor radio, endlessly repeated. I tapped away at my Remington portable. Quick brown foxes by the thousand jumped over lazy black dogs. I typed in the morning, I typed in the afternoon, clickety-clickety-click, cling, clickety-clickety-click, cling, banishing thoughts of Bangkok and Borneo. I typed poems and short stories. I typed essays. I typed a short dissertation on Tolstoy. One day, I had a breakthrough. I no longer knew where the letters were on the keyboard. Only my fingers knew. I could touch type. It was like being reborn. It was a transfiguration. I was now Homo typens. By the end of February, I could type almost as fast as I could talk. It changed my life. For the next 50 years, first at typewriters and then at computer screens, I sat and watched my thoughts turn effortlessly, unthinkingly into script. English thoughts, French thoughts, Russian thoughts. I sit, I tap, and there they are before me, the word made flesh. It's magic. Few summers have stayed with me as that one has. There have been other crushes since, of course, at different points, mostly in summer. I have been moonstruck, infatuated, almost cuckoo with desire, and even dangerously deranged. I have even been married. But the clack of a typewriter, a bar or two of She Loves You, in the summer of 1964, comes flooding back in vivid detail. The summer when longing turned into typing, and the writer in me was born. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us the chance to hear that. Well, why don't we talk about marriage in the modern sense? Because there are some interesting trenchant views on that in this latest book.
Not everyone here will agree with me, of course, no.
And we're different. Our political system's a bit different to Australia on this. But, I mean, there was debate here about introducing gay marriage, in the gay community particularly.
You see, what I say in the book, I mean, as I say, I'm lying in bed and I'm feeling a bit cross. I shouldn't read it, should I?
No, I think you can just talk about it.
Just talk about it. Is that I and my friends do not need the approval of any church or of the state to live with whoever we choose to live with. Therefore, we do not want to marry. Neither the church nor the state has been kind to us over the centuries, and I do not seek the approval of these institutions. And I do not believe, you see, that marriage exists in some ethereal or spiritual sense. It is a social arrangement, and I have no need of it. But if some people feel they do, if they feel that this gives them a protection, then they should feel free. I mean, the Pope's against it, so broadly speaking, I'm for it, of course. But not in my own case.
Yeah, because for people who haven't read the book, I mean, this sort of discourse is alongside what I think is a remarkable continuing portrait of well, that's why I say this book sort of is a companion piece for A Mother's Disgrace, your relationship with Peter, who you describe as your continuance. And it's just beautifully described, you know, and that makes the argument quite powerful, because it's saying, you know, we were fighting for the freedom to invent our own relationships and live as we want to. Why do we want to buy into this construct?
Well, that's how I feel. And when I met Peter, and that was 34 years ago now, it was through an advertisement in the paper, and we have found our own way to live in the world. And I think every single person in this auditorium today, everyone in the front row, the second row, right to the back, everyone has their own combination of ways to live with the world and the demands that are placed on them in terms of the emotions and of sexuality and of achievement and of fulfillment. And it's not for me to tell anyone in this room how they should arrange those things in their lives. But in my life, I don't need marriage. I have lived with Peter for 34 years. It's not the way I lived with my wife when I was married. It's not the way my friends live with their wives or their boyfriends or their girlfriends, whether they are men or women. It's our way of doing it. And it's based on a particular kind of love. And it's not perfect. It's not Hollywood. And that's the other wonderful thing about being old, that you realize it isn't perfect and it's never going to be. And that's all right. I think there are so many wonderful things about being old. And this book is partly about how to be old in a good way, about not trying to be young when you're not, and you never will be again, because there are good ways. And that's one of them. I feel immeasurably blessed, and that's a word my mother used because she was a Presbyterian, as you were actually, I think, weren't you? We had lunch yesterday. I found out all sorts of things which I won't reveal. She would have said blessed, and I feel blessed. I mean, agnostics and non-believers and atheists don't have a good word to use instead of blessed, but that's how I feel for meeting Peter, and it is not totally right, but it brings a lot of joy to both of us. And so I ring Peter twice a day, 3 times a day when I'm in Wellington. I ring Peter twice a day when I'm in Nepal. But, of course, it's not the way I thought things would be when I was 18. It lives a life of its own.
But you're well placed to talk about marriage because you've been married. And can you envisage the institution changing? Because marriage now in 2016 is not the same as it was in 1916 as an institution. Can you envisage it changing in a way that you think it might make sense for gay people?
Well, Kim Hill said to me, some of you might have heard me talking to Kim Hill a couple of months ago, and Kim Hill said to me, oh, well, you know, be more tolerant, perhaps by having such a thing as gay marriage, gays will help reinvent marriage. And of course, all I can say is maybe that's true. Maybe they will. I just don't quite see the point. If you want a party, have a party. But if you want somebody to say what you are doing has a reality beyond a social arrangement, then I don't understand really. It is a social arrangement. It always has been just a social arrangement. It is quite recent in human history, actually, even in the Christian church, that it has been anything more than a social arrangement. And maybe gays will help bring a little bit of common sense to marriage and de-romanticize it a little bit. Because what I do say in the book is, romance is very real, but I don't think marriage is romantic. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with marriage. It just means that it's probably not for me, that's all.
But whether it's this book or the other books, I think there's this the one, what makes your writing engaging and appealing is this sense of being alive to the world, wherever you are. You know, it can be in a hospital bed in Sydney, where, you know, in your own country, or it can be further afield.
But what else are you going to be alive to?
Well, yeah, but I did want to ask you about something that's floating around at the moment, this idea of mindfulness. And
Of what mindfulness?
wondered what you thought about that.
I'm against it.
You know, I thought you might say that. But isn't it in the same bailiwick territory, some of the things they talk about? I know you're not a fan of this concept of living in the moment.
Living in the moment? Good heavens, no. That really is a gaga sort of thing to do. Opposite the hotel where I'm staying, it's got hot yoga. Well, you see, I sneer every time I go past signs saying hot yoga. I don't like hot and I don't like yoga. No, half of you will no doubt go to yoga classes. I go to physio. Why would I go to yoga? I'm going to be dead for eternity. I don't want to be floating anywhere. I want to be here. I want the monkey inside me to be jumping around, chattering. In Cambodia, a monk said to me, what yoga does and what meditation does is quieten the monkey. I said, I don't want the monkey to quieten. I want him to jump around. He hasn't got long. That's how I feel. If you like yoga, please, by all means, go. But to me, it's like being almost dead.
As this links in with, though, that a really appealing, wonderful idea that you quote from Gide about thickening, living a thick life.
I want to live a thick life.
I love that idea.
Not a thin life. I mean, I can only do so much. I have very few skills, actually. That's the odd thing. Can't drive a car. Really can't change a light bulb with any expectation of success. The only thing I can do is write and talk, quite honestly. But I can lead a thick life nonetheless, can't I?
Well, wherever you are. I mean, that's what's wonderful about the writing.
I'm leading a thick life right here now with all of you. I led a thick life with you yesterday in that cafe with a very odd name, Floriditas, or whatever it was called. Floriditas? Where did they come up with that name from?
Time for questions. No.
Time for questions.
But seriously, we'll bring the lights up and then there is time for you to ask Robert some questions.
I better put my glasses on to see who's asking the question.
And one thing that we can talk about, that we talked about that day at that lunch, was what you are working on another book?
I'm writing a book at the moment about leisure. And that's why I've been exploring yoga, because yoga is one way that people spend leisure time. The book is partly about the art of doing nothing, which is terribly, terribly difficult. You think it would be easy. I mean, Dogs can do it, cats can do it, quolls can do it, all sorts of animals can do it. But I find it very difficult. I'm training myself, and I'm slowly getting there. But the first part of the book is about some ways of doing nothing and then gradually learning to do something, but in a leisurely fashion. Goodness, it's difficult, because we live in a society that tells us that achievement is very impossible. It's very important. I don't really need to achieve anything anymore. And so leisure is what I'm writing about. Perhaps I'll come back to Wellington and tell you what I've discovered, and you can argue with me about leisure.
Learning to be idle.
Idle. You see, idle is a lovely word. Indolent is not a lovely word. Indolent is a bad word. Idle is a wonderful word. Idle means that you are master of your own time, and that is the aim, to be master of your own time. So much of my life has been spent not being master of my own time, but being somebody's slave. And now I can more often say, no, don't want to do that. I want to be master of my own time. I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't want to finish à la recherche du temps perdu. Take it away.
Anyone has a question, raise your hand, and there are runners. I'm quite happy to keep asking questions. It was exciting at this festival to see this wee book on humbug, a collection of essays. Well, it is an essay. It's part of an essay series. Robert, how did this come about? It's an exploration of humbug, which is something, until I read this, I hadn't really thought about too much. Bullshit, and then a thing called mindfuck, which I had heard of, but I now know a bit more about it thanks to this.
Yes, well, humbug is theatre, really, and there's a lot of it about, and I indulge in it. I mean, I've indulged in it today. There's been a lot of theatre in what I've done today. Of course, I'm performing. What else would I be doing up here in front of 400 people? I'm performing. It's theatre. And so I've said things that are not quite true for the effect that they will have on you. It's humbug. What was the second one? Remind me.
Bullshit.
Bullshit. Bullshit is where you are actually trying to convince somebody that what you are saying is true, so that they will start to believe you and follow in your footsteps. Politicians do bullshit all the time.
Because you say
Humbug,
a pink
but also
wig.
bullshit.
A pink wig is humbug, but a toupee is bullshit. Because it's
Exactly.
false. And then what about the third one?
A toupee is bullshit. It's trying to convince you that I'm not going bald. This is mine, by the way, totally. I'm just here to tell you. A mindfuck is where you have been totally, where your mindset has been totally taken over by somebody. And I take the example of a certain religion in my book, which I feel has done that was made up as a kind of fairy tale, humbug, became bullshit, I suppose, in the sense that it produced a certain amount of wealth for the people who were propagating it, and now it's become a mindfuck. People actually believe it. Actually, truly, really believe it.
So linking back to what we were talking about with the information explosion and the rise of things like social media, you sort of said we were actually more vulnerable to this, or less able to resist these three things. There's the information revolution, the cognitive science revolution, the idea that there's no truth, and then nihilism.
Yes, if you believe there is no truth, of course, that makes you really a bit of a sitting duck in some ways, I think. This is the French notion, the postmodern notion. There's no such thing as truth. There are only competing subjectivities. I don't agree with that, really. I think that there is a reality. We might never be able to completely understand it, but there is a reality, and it's interesting, I think, to see how much of it you can get your mind around. But if you believe that there is no such thing as an objective reality, then I think you're setting yourself up to be diddled.
Well, it's not really a plot spoiler, but it sort of ends on a really positive, optimistic note with these three little handy hints, which I think are worth sharing if you don't read the essay yourselves, about feeling a bit more in control of that situation. And you said we can care more about the truth, we can hone our ability to reason, and we can refine our nose for shit.
That's right. I was thinking of that man who was told he was an art critic, and Sidney Nolan, I think, was it? One of our artists said...
And they said the publisher gave him the design for his book cover, didn't he? And he said,
right.
I don't like it, it's not beautiful.
I don't like it. And he said, well, you don't know anything about art. He said, I might know a good painting when I see it, but I've got an unfailing nose for shit. And I think that goes for a lot of us. And there's a lot of it about.
But how do you reconcile that, though, with this idea of, well, you say the Americans call it creative nonfiction, which is the territory you write in.
I write in it, yes.
Yeah, you said you're not making things up, but you're rearranging them on the page to lead the
Well,
reader.
I think I tell you what I'm doing so that you can go with me knowing what I'm doing. Like these people here today, they know what I'm doing. They're looking at me. They know that on the one hand, you and I are having a conversation. On the other hand, I'm doing a clog dance. They're not fools. People know. And I try to give clues. And in my first book I wrote, it's a line from Jeanette Winterson actually, I'm telling you stories. Trust me. And if you've got an ounce of common sense, you know what that line means. And it's true of everything I write. I'm telling you stories. I'm moving things around a little bit. I'm saying things were green when in fact they were blue because I want a word starting with a grr. But trust me, you can.
So it's about literary truth.
It's
getting people to trust you and buy it.
It's about truth rather than fact. I tell the truth rather than display facts, I think. I mean, in this book, for example, I actually, in real life, went to India after being in hospital.
Oh.
But if I'd written it like that and I started off writing like that, I got all tangled up in tenses of the verb in English. I would later see, later I was to see, and I thought, I can't do with that. I saw it. And I started to use the simple past. And I thought, who cares whether I went to India before, after, during? No one gives a stuff.
That's very interesting. That is really intriguing. Yes, and that's exactly why lots of journalists have asked you about the specifics of the medical details of what were going on, and that's not the point, as you said at the start.
It's not the point, no.
The point is to have the sense of what that experience was like.
Yes. Go with me and think about your own life and what makes it beautiful. And how, starting this afternoon, you're going to go and be master of your own time a little bit more and think more about beauty. I mean, the line I've spoken about before is this one, that in English we say, a good life. I want to have a good life. I want to lead a good life. Well, you see, as soon as you translate that into French, it doesn't work. Because to a Frenchman, being French, that sounds like a virtuous life. And the last thing a Frenchman wants to lead is a virtuous life, obviously. A Frenchman says, a beautiful life, une belle vie, mener une belle vie, avoir une belle vie. And that's what I want. I want to have a beautiful life. I want its contours to be beautiful. I want the narrative to be transformative, transfigurative. That's what I want. And so I'm looking for the belle vie, not the good life, really. I've totally given up on virtue. It was not a good match.
Right at the end of this, Robert, you actually quote from, I think it's Albert Einstein, saying, imagination is ultimately more important than knowledge because knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world. And that struck a chord for me with what I think is wonderful about your writing, that it enables us to go on our own journeys in your company, So our time's up. I guess in Māori we have a concept called whakamā, which gets translated as shyness, and I guess you're all a bit whakamā to ask your questions. But Robert will be available in this foyer to sign books and answer any other questions that you were perhaps too shy to ask in the company of everyone. Robert's next Writers' Week event, as he mentioned, is a lecture at the Dessaix Museum in Lower Hutt, Saturday evening, about the lasting influences of a childhood reading of Enid Blyton. And the next session in this theatre is Andrew O'Hagan, Illuminations. So it just remains for me to ask you to join with me in thanking Robert for coming back to be amongst us again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.